And now I am so pleased to introduce the authors today. The author today. I did read the entire book. I am from Poland, and I just loved it. So, for any of you here who have read the book or have know a little bit about it, you'll know why I'm so happy about being Polish. Anyway, the author, hi, is Susan Weissbach Friedman, and she's been a Newcastle resident for over 21 years. Going by Susan Weissbach, she is at LCSW and has been a psychotherapist for more than 25 years with a specialty in women's issues at family therapy and trauma induced therapy. In addition to her MSW and MPH, she graduated from the Ackerman Institute for the Family, is EMDRIA certified, and is a somatic experience practitioner. Klara's Truth is her first novel. And we are lucky enough to have Rhonda. Rhonda is a friend of Susan, and we'll be interviewing her. Rhonda also has been a Chappaqua resident for the past 28 years. Her day job is serving as of counsel to a small law firm in White Plains, practicing real estate and serving as an in house counsel for a not for profit housing corporation. She is the past president of Temple Bethel in Chappaqua and serves on the Town of Newcastle Holocaust and Human Rights Committee. Please welcome Susan and Rhonda. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, especially in this torrential rain, and we really appreciate you being here. As she mentioned, I'm a friend of Susan's. I've known Susan since our daughters were in second grade together. Olivia's here. Kim is here. Her daughter also, they're at the same time. And there's all these people from all these different walks of life. You know, that
Heather's here. There are a bunch of moms.
Yeah, like
with-
from all, you know,
with
from all these
daughters
walks
that
of life.
age.
And
Yeah.
so excited to have you here. There's a bunch of people here from Temple Bethel who are going to be going on a trip to Eastern Europe in the spring. And so there's going to be some things that Susan talks about today that will really be valuable for you guys. And so I'm going to start. The format for this is I'm going to ask Susan some questions. I have like a million questions and I could probably go on for a really long time, but I'll stop so that you guys could ask questions as well. And then a couple of people also gave me some questions to ask prior to the starting. So when you guys have questions, or even if you don't, I can go back to that. So just starting out, you heard Susan's bio. So you know basically, a little bit about her. But what I'm going to start out with is I'm going to ask you to just tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm going to get 3 questions together that are general. You can kind of put them together or ask them separately to tell us a little about yourself. Why and when did you start writing, and what made you write this particular book?
Okay. So first of all, I'm hearing myself through this microphone. It sounds like you guys can hear me, like it's working. Okay. So I started writing. I'll just say, I will admit that right now I recently turned 60. I started writing in my 40s, but I will say that when I was in grade school, I loved creative writing. And there was some of that in what was then called junior high school as well. But once we got to high school, that ended. And in college, I did not choose any of those classes. And so that kind of went by the wayside, but it was something that I had really loved very much as a kid. So when I was in my 40s, I started to write some short stories, and I didn't do much with them. I was also at the same time doing some journaling, some personal journaling, and that was also to some extent in combination with some of my own personal therapy. And many people know, maybe not all, that psychotherapists are encouraged not just in their training, but also throughout their career at different times to be in therapy to deal with their own issues. And so that all kind of combined together as I started to think about how, I should mention one more thing. About around 10 years ago, I started working with people and really doing a lot more training in trauma therapy. So with all of that combined together, I started thinking about sort of old memory as being parallel, old and buried memory, as being parallel to artifacts. And the book was originally going to be called Artifacts. And the book was originally going to start in the Yucatan Peninsula, which I hope is a prequel to this book. But with all of that in mind, once I had artifacts, even though they were also memory, I came up with Klara, who is an archaeologist. And I'm going to try to speak about the book tonight without giving too much away, but I may end up giving some away. I will do my best because I'm sure it's a mixed audience as far as who's read it and who hasn't. And so it's interesting because I am not a psychoanalyst. I have not trained as one, but I read a couple of years ago, I read something and I just looked it up the other day. In 1964, Sigmund Freud came up with this parallel between artifacts and deeply buried memory. So I am not original in coming up with this idea, but it is something that has been around, but I was not aware of it. And so in writing about Klara and in writing about her memories, I thought a lot about wanting to write about trauma and healing, and that was what this book was going to be about. And that given my Jewish background, I don't have any family that survived the Holocaust. But, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I learned a lot about the Holocaust in Hebrew school, and it just really resonated with me regarding trauma. So I thought about writing about trauma on several different levels: the individual level, family, intergenerational, community, national, geopolitical. And so that's how all of that came together.
So you told us a little bit about the inspiration then for the book. You mentioned that you don't have relatives in Poland, but is there anything about this book that is autobiographical?
You know, I think anytime an author, a writer writes something, there are parts that are. Certainly, I will say this, it's not about being autobiographical, but in terms of being a therapist, it wasn't like I took my therapist hat off and put my writer's hat on. You know, I was a therapist throughout this book as well as a writer. And I also both consciously and subconsciously used, you know, work that I've done with various clients. Nobody in particular and nobody that would be recognizable. And I thought a lot about some of the people that I've worked with. So it's not really autobiographical, but I thought a lot about people that I've worked with and, you know, when they've suffered, at what age they suffered trauma or neglect or abuse. And the younger people are when that happens, the more affected they are, the more affected their nervous systems are, the more affected their emotional well-being and spiritual being is. And also it can affect their intellect at, you know, often during the age it's happening. It takes them often longer to learn what everybody else is learning. So I came up with this character, Klara, who, you know, some people think it's strange that here she's 49 and has this, I think of it as a coming of age experience. And that, you know, well, some people have even commented like on Amazon or Goodreads, and they obviously haven't gotten the point of the book, or I haven't expressed it well enough. You know, she seems like a YA character. I don't really get it. She seems like she's 12 or 13. Well, that's because developmentally and emotionally, she's arrested at that age. She's frozen at that age. And the way she deals with her trauma is that she, as I said, she's frozen and she's really shut down. And she also, you know, gets exhausted and collapses at times. I don't mean physically. There's a part in the narrative where it's just like it's too much for her. Okay. And if you'd like, Rhonda, I can start by reading.
So yeah, so
Okay.
so before there's we mentioned how there's kind of a mixed group here. Some people have read the book already, some people have not. I don't want to do any spoilers, but you keep talking about trauma and the character's trauma before either right before you want to read a little bit about, or do you want to just give a little bit about the plot of the book for the people who don't know, and a little bit about Klara and what her trauma is?
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you if I can do this. If I can read
Sure.
just the in starting with chapter 1, on the bottom of the first page, there's a letter that Klara's mother, who she's quite estranged from, has written to her. And it really outlines the beginning of how this journey for Klara how it starts. So I'd like to read that letter, and it doesn't take very long. And then I'd like to say a little bit more about the story. And I'm also very aware, for people who are interested in going to Poland, I'd really like to talk about my experience being there 10 years ago. And unfortunately, I don't have pictures like on a computer, but I do have some handouts that I'd be very happy to share. There are a few very particular pictures that I personally find very poignant. Okay. All right. So this letter is from Klara's mother, Bessie. Dear Klara, I have surprising news to tell you, and what good news it is. We are inheriting money in your father's name. The Polish government has finally gotten around to reimbursing Polish Holocaust survivors and their families, as well as non-Jewish property owners from Poland and their families, for property the German Nazis and their collaborators stole during the Holocaust and World War II that was subsequently nationalized by the communist regime all those years ago. I know it will be a shock to you, but I must tell you that your father is dead. When I first found out many years ago, you were so young, and I didn't want to upset you. After that, it just seemed easier not to talk about it. The truth is, we were fighting all the time. And he decided to leave after he lost his job due to his drinking. He refused to understand that your grandfather was as important to me as he was, and I couldn't just move out, just the three of us, leaving your grandfather alone to fend for himself. What kind of daughter would that make me? He took a train to Philadelphia from New York City to look for work. There was a job a friend had told him about, and well, the train was in an accident. He was among 5 passengers who were immediately killed. You were so young, only 6 years old. His sister, Rachel, still lived in Warsaw at the time. When I told her about the accident, she somehow had your father's body flown to Warsaw, where he was buried. I know I should have told you sooner. I'm forced to bring it up now that there's a lot of money at hand, $250,000. We could handle it by mail, but I'm worried that your father's sister, if she's still alive, or her family, might try to finagle all the money for themselves. So I think it's best if you travel to Poland, call me right away, Mom. Okay.
So
So
I'm going to give a little bit more background about the book.
yes. So I wanted to start with that because that really is, I think, a good jumping off point for the story. And the story is that at 49 years old, Klara, who is estranged from her mother, she's an archaeologist and a professor at a small liberal arts college, kind of resting on her laurels. She had been much more active in research and been teaching at Harvard before that. But at that age, she finally finds out what happened to the one person in her life who cared about her when she was a child. And she's buried memories about him, about her father, because it's too painful. Her mother and grandfather, who were quite neglectful and critical of her, would constantly say, you know, he left us, he left all of us. So she was left to believe that he abandoned her. So that is obviously a huge trauma for her. What also happens is that the mother and grandfather really pretty much ignore her. Her life really comes about through her reading books, having relationships with teachers, maybe having some friends, but not so much. And so academics really saves her. And archaeology in particular is like something where she could hold a stone and feel connected to generations upon generations before her. And so what ends up happening is she decides right away she's going to go to Poland, and it's not because of the money. And I do want to remember to go back and talk about money, because there's honestly not, this is all created by me. There's very little money that anybody gets in terms of reparations, and I see some people nodding their heads. So that's a whole other issue. So she really wants to go see where her father's buried, go see if her aunt's still alive, go find that family. And that is really what motivates her to go to Poland.
There we go. So this is not purely a historical novel. If you see some of the reviews about it, they call it a mixture of mystery, romance, and Jewish history. But there is a lot of Polish history in it. And if you could talk a little bit about the research that you did to this, as well as maybe some of the places that you visited, that I know that the people who are going on the trip will get to see,
Yes.
and maybe even some recommendations, the must-sees when you go to Krakow and Warsaw.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with, when I wrote this book, my understanding was that there were, and I actually was incorrect, that there were no reparations for both Holocaust survivors from Poland and their families. And it turns out, so actually in some cases I've written a note, but I did not include it here. But I actually just met with a large group of people today who are first generation and second generation survivors, and I included that note with them. It turns out that the Polish government, I'm not sure exactly when, but for a while has given reparations technically. For a while, it was only to Jewish people that were still in Poland. As of 10 years ago, the chief rabbi of Poland told us that there were 5,000 to 10,000 Jewish people living in Poland. There were 3 million people before World War II living in Poland. There were 300,000 living in Warsaw. And it's very hard to actually know the numbers. And a lot of that has to do with also that so many people hid their Jewishness from their families. And maybe we could talk about that in a little while, because that changed after the wall came down in Germany. And many people started to share that with their children and their grandchildren. So in fact, Poland does technically give reparations, but it takes hoops to jump through, and it's very, very little money. So when I created this, my concern was, people are going to think that they can get all of this, a few $100,000. And I quickly learned that anybody who's a Holocaust survivor from a family of Holocaust survivors knows that it's incredibly difficult to get reparations. So in terms of the trip to Warsaw, it was Warsaw, Krakow, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I think many of you may know, Warsaw was really razed during World War II. So it was rebuilt. A lot of it was rebuilt during the communist era. Some of it then since then. And also some of it was rebuilt to look like it had originally looked, whereas Krakow is beautiful. It was really pretty much left untouched. And so there's a stark difference between the two cities. There is one active Jewish cemetery in Warsaw. And I didn't make that part up. It exists on I want to say Okinawa Street, and that's where I had I'm sorry, I had Klara's father's aunt bury him there. And so there's this one cemetery. Apparently there are other cemeteries, but they're not active. There's not enough money to take care of the cemeteries, not just that one, all Jewish cemeteries throughout Poland. I had read that there was actually a report done in the 80s that there were over 1,000 Jewish cemeteries before World War II. And there are many fewer now, and many are in desperate need of really being reconstructed. When we were in Krakow, I'm going to talk about, and I have some pictures I can show as well, just on paper, but we went to a cemetery called Ramu Cemetery. And Ramu Cemetery is right in back of Ramu Synagogue, which is very unusual in the Jewish tradition to have a cemetery and a synagogue next to each other. And in certain cities in Eastern Europe, this happened really because of space issues. What's so special about the cemetery is that there is a wall. I'm going to actually get the picture. I have some pictures that I can hand out. There's a wall that was built out of, here, you guys can pass these. It's the first and second pictures.
You just pass them around.
Okay, so it's mostly the first and second pictures. So this wall was built out of pieces of gravestone that were dislodged, and dug up in, I believe it was in the 1980s. I assume by archaeologists and other people who were trying to put this cemetery back together. And so each piece is a piece of a different gravestone. And obviously you can't know this by looking at it, but when I was there, I was able to put my hands out and then touch it. And the texture of each stone is different. And some have more inscription than others. And it reminds me a lot of, somebody may know the term for this, but there's a type of Jewish art that you put together. It starts with a K, but anyway, you put you put pieces of something that's broken together, and you use like a gold's glue. And obviously there's no gold here, but there's a beauty about it that's even, that's different from what it looked like when it was whole. And being in front of this wall was incredibly powerful to me. And it felt like it had this spiritual beauty, like it was almost like pulsating at a very high level, in terms of the statement that came to me. And in the book, Klara says, "We are stronger together, and we have survived." And I say that there's also a cemetery. No, it's not a cemetery. I'm sorry, a museum in Krakow. And I can get some of the names of the places I went to, and give them to Rhonda, who can share them with people who are planning to go on the trip. There's a well-known museum in Krakow that has all sorts of artifacts, Jewish artifacts. And I'm saying artifacts, articles, let's say articles, and including descriptions of what is Shabbat, what is a ketubah, what is Rosh Hashanah and the other high holidays. And it's a little eerie. I didn't think about it at the time this way, but right after I did, because it's like, we're here, right? There are, I want to say, over 17 million Jewish people in the world. And I know we're like 0.02%, but 2% in this country, but we're still here. And visiting that museum made me feel like, wait, we're learning about a people that it seems like people are studying them because they don't know anything about them, because they don't know any of them, because maybe they're no longer here. And again, there is a small Jewish population in Poland. We went to a couple of synagogues in Krakow, and some of them do have congregations, but we're talking maybe 200 people at most. And there is now a JCC in Krakow. The gentleman who runs the Krakow JCC actually has been giving talks in Westchester in the last few weeks, and also at some synagogues, and also I guess throughout the country, to raise awareness and also probably funding as well.
And you mentioned a synagogue, I don't know if it was in Warsaw or in Krakow, that survived because they actually used it during World War II as a stable.
Yes. So when I was passing around those pictures, the last one shows a synagogue. It shows the Star of David. And it looks like that Star of David's pretty prominent, but it's only because of the angle the picture was taken at. If you walk by, the Star of David's way up high, and it just, the building blends in, and that building only still stands because it was used as a horse stable by the Nazis. And there are other synagogues that were used for many other purposes, and even synagogues today, apparently there is one or was one that was or is still used as a swimming pool. So many of the synagogues did get destroyed. Some of the actual building still stands, but the interior of the synagogues was destroyed, or, you know, the things that could be of value were taken. And so there's been a lot of work and a lot of money that's gone into trying to make it clear that there was Jewish life there, and memorialize different different neighborhoods and significant places, including the Warsaw Ghetto, and also including there's no longer a Jewish quarter per se, but there are some things like there's Yiddish theater. There are typically not too many Jewish actors in the Yiddish theater, but there are some things that have been revitalized.
And you mentioned in the book that Klara goes to Krakow with the romantic interest in her book, and there's a music festival going on at Krakow. Is that something that is a true thing that goes on?
Yes. So once the Berlin Wall came down in 1988 or 89, but I think it was in 89 that somebody who actually was not Jewish, and I don't know the whole history behind it, started this Krakow Jewish Cultural Festival, and it's been taking place since 1989, except for 3 years during COVID. It takes place typically the first week in July, and there are Jewish bands and dancers and artists from all over the world that come, and it's for both Jewish and non-Jewish people alike. I have heard, there's been a little bit of negative criticism. I really just heard it from one person who said I almost don't like to repeat it because it sounds very degrading, that it's like a Jewish Disney World. I didn't find it like that at all. I found that it seemed very authentic, meaning like it was too commercialized. I didn't find it that way. I found it very meaningful. We didn't go every day. We went to some of it. What also happens in my story during this, so there is really this Jewish cultural festival, and actually we were there on Friday night Shabbat that was starting off that week, and we went into a service that was run by a female rabbi who was trained in Israel and lived in Israel, but originally came from the former Soviet Union. And so that was very interesting. And there were a lot of Israeli kids that were there that were visiting.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Jewish authors in general, especially since October 7th of last year, has been having a lot of backlash. And in part of this whole wave of anti-Semitism, there's been things about Jewish authors who have had readings canceled or have had protests outside of bookstores or things like that. And I was wondering if either you personally or authors that you are in contact with have had any kind of effect from this new wave of anti-Semitism post-October 7th.
Okay, well, I have a few answers to that. The first is that, I am somebody who's a new author. I'm not known. So overall, I wouldn't be sort of spotlighted in general, right? Unfortunately, this is a huge issue for many Jewish authors, certainly Israeli authors, certainly also, I guess, agents that are interested in publishing books, say in English or other languages, into Hebrew, and authors that are saying no because they're boycotting Israel. So it's become a huge issue.
I'm going to ask one more question before I open it up to the people in the audience. But my question, I'm going back to the original title that you talked about. And I was an early reader of this book. There are some other people here that were also early readers of this book. And at that point, it was called Artifacts.
Yes.
And you talked about very early on, and you think about something that could be possibly a prequel. And so can you talk a little bit about the stuff that was in the book that you then took out and what you might be doing with that?
Sure. So actually, in this book, I referred to the story of the Yucatan and the story that happens in Klara's life a year before. And I talk about this very wise Mayan woman who she met, who's a healer, and who says to her in the Yucatan, you know, you're so interested in everybody else's artifacts. And everybody else's culture and history. What about your own? What about you? And that really reverberates for her and with her when she is in Poland and going to these various cemeteries and synagogues and feeling like having this feeling that there was a connection that was really very personal for her. So in terms of going back and writing the prequel, I am very interested in doing more. I have about 100 pages. What I feel like I need to do, I mean, I am going to continue to write it, but what I really need to do is, because the level of the bar for what the expectation of accuracy is, historical accuracy for fiction books at this point is really high. I mean, it's become over the last few years much higher. And so if you're writing about a culture that's not your own, for example, if I'm writing about indigenous Mayan people, even present day, I have to really not just do research through books, but I believe that I'm going to have to actually have conversations. And in some cases, I don't know that this would have to happen for me, but in some cases, people have actually had to co-author, use somebody from, have somebody from another culture co-author with them. That sounds kind of extreme to me, especially regarding the fictional aspects. And so I hope I don't have to go that far. But it's just very interesting that this is the way things are right now.
So I have a whole bunch of other questions, but I'm going to defer them for a while and see if there's anybody in the audience that has a question. Leslie?
Okay, so the question was, when I went to Poland 10 years ago, was it to do research for this book, or was I just going on a family vacation? Okay, it was both. So I had already come up with the idea of wanting at least part of the book to take place in Poland. And so I definitely wanted to do research. I also have a Jewish Eastern European background. So, I mean, my own personal history. And so I was interested, and my husband was very interested in terms of his history. And so we went on a Jewish heritage tour. And it felt very powerful. Like, I will say, I've been to Israel a few times, and that felt very powerful. And in a different kind of way, this felt powerful because, all of us in this country are immigrants, and we've all been uprooted. And to go back to a place, whether it's the place or a place where kind of your people are from, to me felt very connecting and important. And I do just want to speak about an experience when we went to Auschwitz-Birkenau. I don't know if they still do this every summer, but a couple of times a week for many years, and perhaps still, the Israeli army, 100 people from the Israeli army walk on Birkenau, and they carry Israeli flags. And when we were there that day, they were doing a special service for a woman who was a Holocaust survivor. and they played the bugle, and they read from the Torah, and it was chilling. So to answer your question, it was a combination, but even if I hadn't written the book, it was so worth it. And I want to say, somebody probably knows, there's a movie that just came out, and it's only in movie theaters. Does anybody know the name of
Yes,
it?
it's A Real
A
Pain.
Real Pain. I have not
with
seen it.
Jesse Eisenberg. It's
Okay,
wonderful.
so it's wonderful. So I've heard, I will say, Rhonda says it's wonderful. I've heard mixed things, but what I have heard is really wonderful. What I have heard is really wonderful is what they show of Poland. That, like, if you guys are interested in going, it sounds like that's a movie to really see.
So just so that you know, I mean, this is like my big genre, and I go to see this stuff all the time. But I dragged Ken with me, and he said he thought it was really worthwhile, right?
Okay, I'm sorry. It may be. I may think it's wonderful. I've heard different things, but would you say that the part about like what they show in Poland is?
Yeah, I mean, that was very powerful as well.
Yeah.
This may be addressed later in the book, and I just didn't see it, but you talk about people hiding their Judaism. Was that an issue with Aunt Rachel and her family? Is that something, because they're very openly Jewish?
So they are openly Jewish now. Okay. The question is that given that with Aunt Rachel and her family, they're very openly Jewish now. And so I think you were asking, was that always the case? So I don't get into it that much. Like, you know, if I were to go back again, I think I would get into it more. But no, it became more of it. They can be more openly Jewish now, and growing up, it would be, I guess, when Hannah, her daughter, was growing up, she couldn't be so openly Jewish. Not so openly. She couldn't be openly Jewish, and it's really been since the 80s or the late 80s that was just the beginning. And I think that throughout not just Poland, but throughout the whole Eastern European area, that after World War II, everything kind of, when I think of trauma, everything froze. It was like people didn't talk about people that were killed. And there was a certain way of thinking about things, and you weren't supposed to question it. You weren't supposed to talk about it. My understanding is that Catholicism, which was always a big thing in Poland, I think still existed, even though they weren't supposed to be religious. But being Jewish was not something that you could be open about. And I actually named Rachel. Rachel could have been Rachel, but I named her daughter Hannah. By the time Hannah had a daughter, her daughter's name is also a Jewish name. But if I were to be more accurate, I wouldn't have named Hannah. So that's a very good question.
Other questions?
Yes.
So did you, I'm a second gen, so when did you find out that reparations were never in that large amount of money, except for some of the Austrian Jews and German Jews that had the artwork?
Well, I knew that there.
That from the beginning, but you just decided.
No, I knew from the
question is about reparations and about what did she find out about
and when
that there was really not a lot of
no, I absolutely knew. In fact, a part of my choosing Poland, and this was, I think, somewhat subconscious, was that I was under the impression that they gave no reparations. And I understand that it's basically like no reparations, although technically they do. And so I thought about in terms of trauma and healing, that healing, a part of healing is, if there can be, and this is both, on several levels, including an individual and family level, as well as a country level, if there can be an apology, and beyond that, if there could be reparations, that is incredibly meaningful to the other side, as far as really being seen and being taken in. And so my belief starting out was that Poland did not give any reparations. And so in the very beginning of the book, I say that I created that. In the next printing and on my audio and on my ebook, I say that Poland technically gives reparations, but it's very small. So I kind of went overboard. I did not realize, because there's such limited reparations, that they gave reparations at all. And so I went overboard in saying they do not, because I didn't want people to think, oh, I can go and get $250,000, like I said in the story. But what I realized in talking to Holocaust survivors is everybody knows that nobody's getting that kind of money. So it's totally made up. And so the one thing that I unfortunately kind of didn't get correct was that technically Poland, gives these reparations, but it takes so much effort to get them, and that the actual amount of money is very, very limited.
Question over here.
This is making me think of another book, Red Dirt.
I don't know.
And Red Dirt was written by a woman who was not herself, I think, of the culture she was writing about. It was set in Mexico. Story of a woman trying to get out of Mexico situation. Anyway, I read the book. I really enjoyed the book a lot. I thought it was great. And this criticism also came to bear on who's representing the culture, talk about it, and accuracy. I don't remember specifically if there were certain things that were not particularly accurate. But I guess it makes me think in general, like, then how do people writing fiction make sense? Like, you chose 250,000. This is really actually my question. So why that number? And even if it isn't historically accurate, the genre is fiction.
Right. And
We have to,
okay.
I don't know.
And I went really beyond in the very beginning and saying this was created by me. So I was very, very clear about that. But why I came up with 250, I wanted it to be a significant amount of money that Klara's mother would want, like would really go after. It would drive the plot, because so she would go after her daughter to go and not just get it by mail, but physically go and get it and make sure other family members didn't take it. Yes. Yes.
I'm just thinking, you think people could be alive to the genre?
Yeah. And, also, as I said earlier, to me, as a therapist and as a trauma therapist, I really wanted to write about trauma and healing, and having this woman who at 49, without having had nurturing figures in her, in her early life, although she had her father, but she buried those memories. And she didn't have other people along the way, how she got to where she was, and then what could help her to develop. And as a therapist, I can't create a family, right? Nobody can. But what was so exciting to me is, as a writer, I could create this family and give her all this support from this aunt who her father was very close to, and ultimately from a cousin who is very suspicious of her at first, and ultimately where she's able to connect to a potential romantic partner. And so to me, the backdrop of the Holocaust it not just made sense, it just felt right? Like growing up, knowing about it, it just made sense to me and felt right to write about that as the backdrop.
Susan, when you talk about writing that character and creating a family for her, it brings a question that somebody had given me at the beginning. And they wanted to know if there was a particular character that you were writing for that was your favorite character in this, or if some of the characters were much harder to write than the others.
Oh, I'd be very happy to. Thank you for coming. Yeah, so I think Aunt Rachel was a favorite character. She was just so loving, and she was a little suspicious of Klara initially. Not initially, but soon after she learns certain things that Klara is Klara. But she's just so, ready to just take her in and kind of take care of her. And I loved writing her. The character that was the hardest for me to write was Rachel's daughter, Hannah. And Hannah is extremely suspicious of Klara when she first comes. And that is because Hannah's family, meaning her mother, Rachel, has gotten the same letter from the Polish government that Klara's mother got, right? That Bessie got. And so, which is there's all this money. And so Hannah, Rachel's daughter, suspects that, and Rachel does a little bit too, that, well, why else, all these years have passed. Why haven't you come and tried to find us before? And the truth is that Klara knew nothing or very, very little about her father's family because her mother shared nothing.
Any other questions? Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'm going to ask one more last question to end. And the question that I want to end with is that you've been going around and you've been speaking to a lot of different groups and to some bookstores and to other areas. And I thought that you just could talk about the experience that you had today, because it was a really interesting group, right, that you spoke to today. It wasn't your regular, just, suburban group.
Yeah. Well, what's really nice about this kind of format is that versus I had an event earlier today and it went nicely. And it was basically me at the podium up in front of an audience of people. And it's so much more comfortable to, I sort of end up getting off track a little bit, but it's so much more comfortable to be in conversation.
Who was your audience that you were with this afternoon?
Oh, the audience I was with this afternoon was actually a group of Holocaust survivors and some second-generation survivors, and they themselves actually ended up speaking about some of their own stories. So it was fascinating. I felt very honored to be there, truly honored. But I'm just saying, in terms of the format, also, knowing that you're all from this community and feeling like, if you have a sense that people want you to succeed, right? Like in terms of that, they want things to go well. And I do have that feeling here that it makes things even nicer. So when people aren't all strangers, it makes it, I think that's just a normal reaction, right? It makes it more comfortable and a little easier.
So I want to thank everybody again for coming. I want to thank Joan so much for setting all this up. There's coffee and tea and snacks, and Susan has books that she's going to be over there. And again, thank you all for coming out on this terrible night.